My grandfather told me this story when I was a teenager. I'm 52 now. My granddad grew up in the woods of central New Brunswick, in a very remote area, where only survivalists go now. Their whole family lived out in the sticks, and they lived by hunting, fishing, trapping, and some logging. Granddad said when he was a teenager, he and his older brother Duke were up in the early hours checking trap lines on an old motorbike. It was early fall, and there was frost on the grass. It was early in the morning mists, and they still hung around the forest edges. He was still rolling cigarettes with his brother, and they were out of matches. So they dipped a bit of cloth in gasoline and ignited the coil wire, while Duke kicked the bike over. The sound of the bike being kicked over without an ignition is sort of like an animal call. That's how my granddad described it. Anyways, just as they started smoking their cigarettes, my grandfather noticed something bounding through the tree line toward them. My granddad said it ran up in a way a bear did, but it stopped several yards away from them and stood up, on its hind legs. It was still too far to tell what it was, but they assumed it was a black bear because they were very common in New Brunswick. That's when it began walking upright towards them. As it got nearer, Granddad said it looked like a huge werewolf. His family origin was German, so this was not unknown. It got as close as 20 feet away from them and then began to eye them closely. It sniffed their smokes and then turned and hopped and ran back to the trees. Granddad said they were not scared. He said they were only shocked that such a creature was living in the woods. Granddad said it was taller than any man and had a huge head, evil eyes, long, upright ears, hands with long claws, and had hair all over its body. I can't remember what color he said the fur was, but he said it had wolf-like legs. After a stressful day at work, I had gone over to a friend's apartment to shoot the breeze, eat some food, and play a few games on my friend's PS4. It was getting late and I had to be up fairly early the next day. My friend walked me to the parking lot to my car. There was no one else in the parking lot, just us two. As I was unlocking my car, a dog walked out from the side of a nearby building about 25 feet away. It came fully into view and stopped to look at us. It was a little bigger than a standard Great Dane. It was all black with long hair that appeared to be falling out in clumps. It had long ears and a long, scraggly tail. I remember making eye contact with it. It had dark maroon-colored eyes, and in the moment we locked eyes, it smiled at us. But instead of a dog's lips going up and back, the lips went slightly sideways and I saw white, human teeth. I recall suddenly getting a feeling of dread and fear. I felt like it was something disguised as a dog and pretending to be a dog. But it wasn't a dog, I'm certain of it. The energy coming off this thing didn't feel dog-like. I don't know how else to describe it, but my hair went up on end. It turned around from us and began limping slowly back around the corner from where it had stepped out from. It seemed to have most of its weight on its front legs, walking with a hunched back, and then it was limping away. I noticed its rear left foot was wrapped in a blue gauze, and it looked very odd. The heel was actually parallel to the ground. I'm unsure if my friend saw exactly what I saw, but she suddenly said, "It's leaving, let's follow it." And she ran after the damn thing, after it disappeared around the corner. I remember being scared for my friend, so I went sprinting after her. I rounded the corner to find my friend looking around confused. The dog thing was gone. At the rate that it was walking and limping, and given the close proximity to us, which again was no more than 25 feet, there was no way that it could have disappeared that quickly. The air was suddenly extremely cold, even for South Texas in January. My teeth were chattering, and I told my friend to quickly go back to her apartment, lock the door, and stay inside. I warned her that that thing was not a dog, and told her that I'd text her when I got home. Once safe at home, I texted my friend and thought that everything was going to be okay and that would be the end of it. But even as I settled into bed, my heart was racing. It didn't help that at around 12 a.m. there was a low whistling right outside my window. My neighbor's house isn't too far from mine, but they're good people and there is no logical reason for them to be that close to my window at night, whistling. I didn't make any indication that I was aware of the whistling. It wasn't even musical, just the sort of whistle when someone is trying to get the attention of somebody else. Eventually, the whistling stopped and I heard nothing else. I had trouble sleeping. I haven't seen anything or experienced anything like that since. And my big question is, what was that thing? For a couple of months, I was hanging out with an online community that often had lots of anonymous users and registered users speak about paranormal experiences, being scared and asking for advice. Obviously, some were intentionally fake, and some were real or the user thought it was real. Most of the topics were about I think this person might be a werewolf, vampire, etc., etc. Or I think I saw a shadow person, fairies, ghosts, and Slender Man. I often tried my best to give realistic explanations, while at the same time giving them suggestions for what they claimed was 100% true. So quite often, I researched common complaints to find out more about the supposed monsters or creatures. And then I came upon the Topa effect explanation for Slenderman being possibly real. Personally, I think the Topa effect is BS. For if it could really create an entity based on belief, where is the Abrahamic God? As in, why isn't he interacting a lot more with people? So I was pondering, what if the Topa effect was real and Slenderman was powered by it? What would simply not believing in him do to him? And a few days later, I was still pondering. It was late, probably about 12 a.m., so I thought it was time for bed. I have a presentation I have to give tomorrow. I definitely don't want to be sleep deprived. Though, as I was laying in bed, I was just getting a weird feeling from my window, almost as if something was following me. I couldn't see anything at the time, it was too dark, and I wasn't about to get up to check it out, so I continued to try to sleep. After a few minutes later, my eyes are open, and I see Slender Man in my room. I say to its face, or lack thereof, "You aren't real," and then start to think as strong as I can about him not being real. So at this point, he turns into a black mist and starts to choke me. Things go black, and then the next thing I know, I am unconscious. Or so I thought. I looked around my room and saw nothing there, but the dread remained. I am not sure what happened next, though I remember waking up again. At this point, I am concerned since I am logically thinking that this is just a dream, but I don't know what's going on and I am having these weird, seemingly random blackouts and awakenings. So I go to the washroom and then back to my bed to sleep. I think Slenderman appeared again, but this time a woman appeared and drove him off, almost as if it was scared of her. I didn't get a good look at her, so all I know is that her hair was black as black can be. She ended up grabbing my back as I laid in bed and held me. It felt like she was trying to shelter me, almost like when a parent holds their child in bed, trying to make them feel safe. I think I ended up falling asleep during that. Later that night, I woke up again, and there was something eating a snack. I think some other weird stuff happened with a few more awakenings and false awakenings, but it was just plain weird. I have literally no clue what happened that night. There is only one thing I can't confirm, is that I was actually awake, and especially when I went and got a snack, since there was a wrapper left behind. But aside from that, I honestly can't say for certain what was a dream and what wasn't. I live on an acreage, and to get home, I have to drive down the main road past farms, subdivisions, and other acreages. It was a month and a half ago in August that I was driving home from work at midnight. In one of those ditches, when I was maybe about 500 meters away, my high beams illuminated a wolf's head and eyes. It was moving slightly, as though we're eating something or sniffing for something, but my lights didn't show me what. We have coyotes out where we live, and everyone has dogs, but the coyotes are too cowardly to be that close to the road, and a few people let their dogs roam loose at night. Most importantly, it was too big for a coyote or a dog. It was even too big for a wolf. It looked like the size of a bear. As I got closer, it stood up to about the height of a man, maybe a little taller, and moved towards me. And at this point, I passed it at 100 kilometers and didn't look back, too scared to try, and to think of what it really was. This sighting was only about 3 kilometers from my house, so I noped inside the moment I pulled into the driveway. I am fully convinced I saw a werewolf. The location was in the middle of Alberta in Strathcona County, which is east of Edmonton. I saw something on Monday night that still has me totally shaken to my very core. I have always loved nature. I love the woods. I love hiking and camping, fishing, and everything else. I'm really into mycology, so I'm out looking for mushrooms and various types of fungus whenever I get the chance. The weather was absolutely beautiful on Monday for this time of year, so towards the evening time, I decided to round up some of my walleye gear and head down to an old train trestle crossing on the Mahoning River in Niles, Ohio. I had parked my car about a mile and a half from the trestle, so I could walk by the tracks and hit a few of the spots along the river on my way down there. By the time I reached the trestle, it was pretty much dark. I was wearing a headlamp at the time so I could see. At this location, there is a lake directly across the river, which the two are connected by a small overhead dam. I was there for 15 minutes when all of a sudden this overwhelming feeling of dread came over me. I switched my headlamp on to turn around to start back up the riverbank, and right behind a big sycamore tree, I saw what looked to be a very, very large animal. It was kind of kneeling beside it and behind it. As I locked my eyes on it, I completely froze. I knew I was definitely seeing something there, but my mind couldn't process it. What was I looking at? It didn't make any sense. The thing that I kept saying to myself is, animals aren't supposed to look like that. Right as I'm thinking this, it's as if this thing read my mind, stood up, and made itself perfectly visible in the most pretentious way possible. It almost had this vibe, like, yeah, now you see me, you know I'm real and I definitely exist. What are you gonna do about it? As soon as it happened, it kind of hunched over and made its way into the brush. It was out of there in like a flash. As soon as my feet hit the tracks, I ran, and I ran the entire way back to my car without stopping. By the time I reached my car, I couldn't breathe. Both my legs were locked up. I was vomiting, and somewhere in between the encounter and running away, I had pissed myself. It's early Friday morning now, and I think I've only slept for about 6 or 7 hours altogether. I've been consistently searching YouTube and all kinds of stuff, listening to eyewitness accounts, and it sounds like these things are encountered quite often. I've heard of the dog man before, but never really took it seriously. before the night of this encounter anyway. I would always picture a dogman to look like a skittish coyote-looking creature man. I love the woods and I love nature. The woods for me have always been a safe haven that I could venture into to escape stress at work, bills, relationships, etc. I could always take a nice long hike, go fishing or foraging, and come home feeling 75% better. Now, I feel like I was threatened and kicked out of my second home. The only thing I can do is just try to understand what it was. This was about a year ago. A few details out of the way first. I was living on 44 acres of mountain land. There are several buildings on the property, but the main two are currently my parents' house and their guest house. They are only 20 feet apart, or about the distance of a single-lane gravel road. I was in my parents' house, cooking something. My house was the guest house. It doesn't have a kitchen or anything, so I used my parents' house for cooking and showering and stuff. No one but myself was living on the property at the time. Okay, to the story. I was cooking. I had heard the house shake. I'm not sure how to otherwise explain it, but it sounded like the corner of the house shook. Kind of like a dog just shook up after getting out of the water. Well, coincidentally, there's a creek right next to the house. So I walk into the living room from the kitchen on my way out the front door to check what's going on. I don't see anything. I looked outside and didn't hear anything moving. I was about to close the door and the cat comes in. Strange, I thought. But at the same time, it didn't faze me too much because it's a cat. They come in and out at all hours of the day. Well, sooner than later my food was done, and I wanted to go back to my house so I could watch TV. As I was walking across the road, I noticed a figure to my left. So I turned to look at it, and there stands this 5 foot tall, ears stitched straight up and were about shoulder high on me, and I'm 5'11", German Shepherd. It was standing regular, like a dog would, but its eyes glowed red. It was a complete silhouette of an animal, so I didn't see any features, but it had the build of a German Shepherd. It didn't move. It just stared at me. 10 feet away from me, and I darted into my house to grab my shotgun, and I came back outside to find that it was gone. No sign, no sounds, nothing, it was just gone. I fired off a couple rounds in case it was still around somewhere off, but it was gone. My parents want me to believe it was a coyote. Coyotes aren't built that beefy, and this thing was freaking huge and buff, like pitbull bred to kill buff. Most accurate description of the animal that I can think of with glowing red eyes, vertical pointed ears, a thick head, round like a pitbull but German Shepherd shape, a thick body. I couldn't see anything below the chest, I was too focused on the eyes, but it did look like it had legs that was standing on the ground, and it was unnaturally still. Me and a group of around 5 or 6 friends and family, all older teens who were camping overnight at a private campground on a small lake in the Kettle Moraine State Forest region of Washington County, Wisconsin. The year was approximately 1970 in midsummer. The nearest town was Coaxum. It was very rural farmland mixed with deciduous and pine forests. We chose to relocate our campsite a little bit further from the main campground in a secluded, natural, practically circular clearing. We liked the spot because of the unusual shape and the fact that it contained a sort of carved-out depression in the center. Here we wished to build a fire and hang out. The sun began to set. As we built our fire, roasting hot dogs and singing, someone happened to remark upon the primordial setting and how we resembled a group of ancient peoples who have done just what we were doing thousands of years ago. Time passed and the hour was 10 p.m., so we began to exchange spooky stories. The sky was very clear and there was an abundance of shooting stars. Also, the moon was bright so we could actually see quite a bit of what was going on around us. There were crickets, of course, but no other folks were around, only us. Suddenly, from off in the distance in the woods, we heard the sound of something coming towards us, breathing heavily. This area had long ago become devoid of any large wild animals. Pieces of wood were crackling and breaking as it walked. We could hear large, trudging footsteps in the underbrush in a loud, snarling, huffing, puffing, breathing sound. It did not sound like an animal, but more human. Soon, we also heard twigs snapping and the creature, whatever it was, getting closer and closer to the edge of the woods and nearing our clearing. It let out several blood-curdling growls and was so close we were terrified. That was all it did. That's all it took for us to be shaken. We gathered up all of our gear and ran out of there as fast as we could so the creature could not get us. It really was trying to chase us out of its spot, I believe. None of us slept the entire night. I have been in camping situations where young men try to scare you, but they were usually in groups or drunk and end up showing themselves. This was one creature against several of us and it showed no fear. I am sorry to say that we did not get a solid glimpse. At the time, everyone knew about Bigfoot, so we assume that's what we encountered. We talked about it, but never found out what was actually out there, until I heard of the research on something called Dog Man. Could this possibly have been the man dog? Let me know what you think. I want to tell you about an incident that happened in Northern California about 10 years ago. I did not see this. I interviewed the woman and her son about the sighting and an eyewitness that did not know her or her son. This happened about the same time that there were a lot of chupacabra sightings elsewhere. The middle-aged woman, with her 16-year-old son, was driving in her new, to them, used car. It was a convertible. They live in the foothills of the High Sierras, at about 2,500 feet elevation. They were going to the store. She and her son were driving from their home down the only mountain road towards town. The road drops off to the left into the canyon and dropped down from the road at 1,800 feet. On the right is a trail, then tapers off the canyon to the west. She suddenly saw what she called the dog from hell. She described it as the ugliest and the weirdest looking dog she ever saw. It was black and the dog's neck was 2 feet long between his head and shoulders. I named it the snake dog. I reported this to other people, and at the time I did not have any photographs, so I did not go any further. She said as fast as it appeared, it had gone to the right of her car and disappeared. The car was going no more than about 35 miles per hour. She swerved her car to the left to avoid hitting it. The car swung around, and now was going backwards toward the side of the road. As it shot off the road and over the canyon, the car flipped over upside down. They had their seatbelts on. The car flew out at about 100 feet. It landed upside down about 90 feet down and sloped in canyon wall. She said that's when they hit the ground. They heard the sound of breaking glass. When all of the movement had stopped, they were both alive. Still upside down, the engine was still running. She reached for the ignition key to turn off the engine. The only injury was her son, Sean, had a scratch on the back of his hand. They both crawled out from under the car after releasing their seatbelts. By that time, help was arriving. You could not see the crashed car from the road going either direction. It turned out that the car behind them witnessed the whole event. A driver happened to have a cell phone and called for help. I talked with that driver and confirmed the whole story. That driver had also seen the snake dog, but by then it was gone and had not been seen again. So what do you think? Have you ever heard of any creature that looked like this alleged snake dog? I am open to a lot of things and was not at all skeptical when my friend told me that she saw a shapeshifter on the local reservation near where she lives. She delivers newspapers, and I helped her out for a month after she had some surgery done. We would walk and talk about folklore and the customs and traditions because I've always been interested in that sort of thing, but never knew much about this particular tribe due to a lot of different things. She would tell me about seeing this big black dog on occasion, and when she would blink or look away and then look back, it would be a woman. Always the same woman, just different ages. If it was anyone else telling me this, I would have thought it was a trick of the light or being tired or etc. But from her, I believed it. One night, when I was with her, we put up to a man and woman. We always offer papers to the homeless or people walking around because you'd be amazed at how happy some people get just by the gesture of it alone. They both accepted the paper, and when the woman grabbed hers, my friend teased and I just froze. She was very nice in the 10-second interaction we had, but it was almost like she had sent a tendril of energy up my friend's arm and around the cab of the truck as if to say, I know you know, but don't mess with me. But not in a menacing manner, just to pretty much like a warning shot of a gun. After they had walked away, we were heading up my road, and my friend had stated that she was the wolf woman, and if I had felt that, she did. And I nodded to her. We spent the next hour in silence, still feeling it roll through us. My friend got the full brunt of it, and I'm sure that I got a pretty powerful kickback as well. It was like a light electricity arcing and dancing from nerve to nerve, creating goosebumps and shivers on occasion. It wasn't overall a bad experience at all, rather the opposite. Just not really something you'd expect to happen as casually as it did. I really miss going out on that route. Always something interesting, but that was the first time in a long time that I was reminded of the universe as being bigger than we think it is. I used to work 30 miles away from where I live. One night, I had been stuck in heavy traffic coming home. I take Lasix, so after a while, I really had to go to the bathroom. I kept telling myself that I was almost home and tried to hold it until I got there. By the time I got to my exit, I knew I wasn't going to make it to my house, so I pulled up to an area where Fidelity Investment is located and found an area that was isolated. This area is heavily wooded, with walking trails and a lot of game, but it is also in a very populated area. I pulled up a little side drive, off of one of the main roads. The little drive is about 100 feet long, with only room for one car. It went up in elevation and had bushes on the right side, facing the main road. On the left side, there was a guardrail and a view of the valley below. The area up there is huge and isolated, with several buildings that are all spaced out. The place is dark at night because there are intermittent streets lit up there. At night, it's pretty deserted too. A few cars go through that area, though, because it's a shortcut people use to go from Taylor Mill over to 3L Highway, where there are stores, restaurants, etc. When you're up there, you're above everything around this area. When I stopped, I got out of my car, waited a moment and looked around to make sure there were no other cars. It was winter, so the bushes between where I was and the road below me didn't have many leaves on them. Because of that, you could see right through them. I was up on this little rise about 20 or 30 feet above the drive, which was 4 lanes wide. To the left of me was a street light and more woods that went down another hill to the main road. I went to the back of my car and did what I had to do. When I finished, I stood up and all at once, every hair on my body stood up. I knew I wasn't alone. I scanned the area in front of me and must have heard something behind me because I turned around and there were 3 deer standing there, all huddled up together between my car and guardrail. They were looking at me. They were looking across the road, and I looked back over there. And that was when I saw a figure standing between the bushes in front of it and the tree line behind it. It was huge. I stand at 5'5". Some of those bushes were about 6 feet tall, but they only came up to about the collarbone area on this thing. Due to the street light to the right of it about 20 feet away, I was able to get a pretty clean outline of his thing. It had a large dog-shaped head and pointed ears. I couldn't make out his neck, but I could make out massive shoulders. That's when it growled. It was of deep vibration. I could feel it in my chest. My body just took over at that point. I have to explain part of it to you. I worked security for years in California in the music business. As a woman, I have to really work out and train to defend myself. I kickboxed for 8 years and worked out every day. I also trained dogs, mainly Anatolian Shepherds and German Shepherds. Sometimes I have to establish who's the alpha, and to do that, I get them down, hold them into place, and grab them by their ear and growl until they submit. Then the training can start. So when this thing growled at me, it was just pure instinct. I dropped down to a crouching position and growled, right back at it. When I did that, it stopped growling and started sniffing the air. The snout went up and it turned its head slightly as it was sniffing. Then it took a few steps forward. I was still crouched down on all fours and moved forward, still growling at the thing. When I did that, it stopped. I stood up and kept staring right at it. I never broke eye contact with it. Then it slowly stepped back into the tree line until I couldn't make it out as clearly as before, and it started to move to the right of me. The deer were still behind me. They were so close, I could have reached out and touched them. I waved my arms and told them to get out of there. When I did that, they went back over to the guardrail and took off down the hill. That's when I jumped in my car and got out of there as fast as I could. I felt that this thing was trying to circle behind me, and I wasn't going to wait around for it to do that. Do I think I scared it? No, not at all. For I do think I confused it for a couple of minutes, and that gave me time to move. I told my husband about what happened up there, but I didn't tell him exactly where I saw. He would think I was nuts, and to be honest, I thought I was a little crazy myself, till I saw a picture of one of these things that people call a dog man. I know there are other things in this world that can't be explained. I've seen them, but this was beyond any of those things. Since this has happened, I can't take that shortcut through that area anymore. My husband took me back over there once, and I was freaking out and begging to leave the whole time. I thought I was going to throw up. The wildlife up there has almost totally disappeared. I've never seen anything like this. There's nothing up in the hills anymore. The street I live on is only about a mile or so down the hill from this place, and lately, we've seen coyotes on the streets. Like they have been chased out, and pets here have started to go missing. We've also seen a large black figure moving through our backyards down here. The dogs drive the neighborhood go crazy regularly now. People were calling the cops when we saw that large, black figure jumping fences. I'm concerned that it has come down the hill after eating everything up there.